Welcome to Cafe Tales, where captivating stories and mysteries come to life. Make sure to subscribe and join us on this exciting journey of suspense and intrigue. We'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can improve our content. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your feedback means a lot to us. Miss Marple and the Groom's Unseen Fate. Chapter 1. An Unwelcome Guest Miss. Jane Marple sat comfortably in her favorite armchair, the gentle ticking of the mantelpiece clock keeping rhythm with the soft click of her knitting needles. The cozy fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the delicate floral wallpaper of her modest drawing room. The cardigan she was knitting for her niece was nearly complete, crafted in a charming shade of cornflower. Blue, Emily's favorite color. She paused momentarily to examine her work, smiling approvingly as she adjusted her spectacles. Outside, a gentle drizzle had begun, tapping rhythmically against the windows, adding to the snug warmth indoors. Miss Marple enjoyed such quiet evenings, free of the troubles that often seemed drawn to her small village of St. Mary Mead. However, experience had taught her that peace rarely lasted long. As if on cue, the tranquility was disrupted by a faint knock on the door. Before Miss Marple could rise to investigate, Gladys, her faithful servant, appeared breathlessly in the doorway, her cheeks flushed with urgency. "Miss Marple," Gladys announced hurriedly, smoothing the wrinkles from her apron. "Inspector Craddock is here. He says it's rather urgent. Shall I show him in?" Miss Marple set her knitting aside gracefully, her curiosity immediately piqued. "Oh yes, Gladys, please do. And perhaps some tea. The inspector will likely appreciate it." Gladys nodded eagerly and bustled out again, leaving Miss Marple alone to wonder briefly about the reason behind Inspector Craddock's sudden appearance. The inspector was not merely a policeman. He was an old acquaintance who often sought Miss Marple's keen eye and razor-sharp intuition in complicated matters. It was rare, however, for him to appear so late, unannounced, and clearly troubled. Moments later, Inspector Craddock entered the room, removing his hat respectfully as he approached her. His usually genial expression was unusually somber. "Good evening, Miss Marple," he said warmly, though his tone betrayed underlying concern. "Good evening, Inspector," she responded, indicating the comfortable chair opposite hers. "Please sit down." Inspector Craddock settled heavily into the chair, looking for a moment as though he bore the weight of the entire county on his shoulders. He cleared his throat, clearly unsure of where to begin. Before he could speak, Gladys returned, carrying a tray with a steaming teapot, cups, and a plate of freshly baked biscuits, which she placed gently on a small table between them. "Ah, excellent," Miss Marple smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, Gladys. That will be all." The servant discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone in the fire-lit comfort of the room. Miss Marple carefully poured tea into 2 cups, adding just the right amount of sugar to the inspector's cup without needing to ask. "Now," Miss Marple said gently, passing him the tea, "whatever is troubling you, Inspector?" "Inspector?" Craddock took a sip, seemingly gathering strength from the warmth of the tea. Finally, he spoke. "It concerns a young man named Simon Ashcroft. You might have heard the name." Miss Marple's eyes brightened slightly with recognition. "Ashcroft? You mean the prominent jewelry family? They've often featured in the local newspapers." "Precisely," Inspector Craddock confirmed solemnly. "Simon Ashcroft was found dead this morning at Ashcroft Hall." Miss Marple paused thoughtfully, setting down her tea with care. "Oh dear. How dreadful for the family. Was it an accident? Officially, the inspector began slowly, clearly weighing each word carefully. It's been recorded as suicide. His body was discovered locked inside his bedroom. No sign of forced entry, and everything points to Simon taking his own life. Miss Marple considered this for a moment, sensing something more behind the inspector's cautious choice of words. But you have doubts, Inspector? Inspector Craddock sighed deeply, his eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a blend of frustration and respect. Simon's mother, Mrs. Ashcroft, refuses to accept it was suicide. She insists her son would never harm himself, particularly not now. You see, he was engaged to be married in just 2 days. By all accounts, he seemed perfectly content. His family is influential, and Mrs. Ashcroft's convinced someone wanted Simon dead. Miss Marple listened intently, carefully noting every detail. And your own thoughts on the matter, Inspector? Truthfully, Miss Marple, we've examined every angle thoroughly, Craddock confessed. My men found nothing suspicious at all, yet Mrs. Ashcroft's certainty is unsettling. It's difficult to dismiss entirely. Indeed, Miss Marple murmured softly, her mind already considering possibilities that went beyond mere appearances. One must always be careful not to dismiss a mother's instincts too hastily. There might well be something she sensed, a subtlety easy to overlook. Precisely. Craddock nodded gratefully, relief evident in his expression, as if Miss Marple had validated something he hesitated to voice openly. That's why I've come to you. Your insights have often proved invaluable in these sensitive cases. Would you consider accompanying me to Ashcroft Hall tomorrow to speak with the family yourself? Perhaps you'll perceive something we might have missed. Miss Marple picked up her knitting thoughtfully, slowly nodding. Of course, Inspector. I should be honored. And in my experience, she said gently, her eyes twinkling with quiet wisdom, things are often not what they appear. The inspector visibly relaxed, his gratitude evident. Thank you, Miss Marple. After finishing his tea, Inspector Craddock rose, placing his hat back upon his head with renewed purpose. I'll arrange for a car to collect you tomorrow. Morning, then. Miss Marple smiled, rising to see him out. I shall be ready. Good night, Inspector. Good night, Miss Marple, he replied warmly, disappearing out into the rain-soaked darkness. Closing the door softly behind him, Miss Marple returned to her chair, her knitting momentarily forgotten. She sat thoughtfully, her eyes gazing intently into the flickering flames. Despite the quiet calmness of her room, a familiar thrill of anticipation stirred within her. A new mystery awaited, and Miss Jane Marple, ever observant, was ready to unravel it. Chapter 2. Meeting the Family. Ashcroft Hall loomed impressively as Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock approached it along the winding gravel driveway. The large stone mansion, though grand and stately, exuded a palpable aura of melancholy. Gray clouds hung low, almost touching the roof, matching perfectly the somber atmosphere enveloping the household. The neatly kept gardens, usually full, of vibrant life, seemed subdued, the colors muted by the gloom of recent tragedy. Stepping into the grand foyer, Miss Marple instantly sensed the tension that lingered within its walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft murmur of whispered conversation from a nearby sitting room. Inspector Craddock gently guided Miss Marple inside, where the Ashcroft family waited solemnly. Their grief was evident, yet beneath it lay layers of unspoken strain. Mrs. Ashcroft rose from a velvet-covered chair, her pale face drawn, eyes swollen from crying. Dressed entirely in black, she appeared fragile yet fiercely determined. "Inspector, you must understand," she began at once, her voice trembling yet firm. "My son was not a man who would take his own life. Simon had too much to live for. Someone has done this. Someone has taken him from us." Her gaze shifted toward Miss Marple with cautious hopefulness. "You are Miss Marple, I presume? I've heard of your reputation. Please, help us uncover the truth," Miss Marple offered, a gentle nod, her keen eyes absorbing every detail of Mrs. Ashcroft's anxious face. "I shall do everything within my power, Mrs. Ashcroft," she replied reassuringly. Mr. Ashcroft stood silently behind his wife, a tall, dignified figure whose solemnity and reserve betrayed little emotion. Yet his clenched jaw and rigid posture spoke volumes to Miss Marple's observant gaze. His grief was quietly powerful, held tightly under control. Aunt Margaret stepped forward briskly, quickly taking charge of introductions. "I am Margaret Saunders, Simon's aunt," she stated firmly, her protective instincts immediately apparent. Her manner was brisk and assertive, her eyes sharp and watchful. Beside her stood Lucy, Margaret's daughter and Simon's fiancée, who appeared pale and withdrawn, her delicate features etched with deep sorrow. Lucy's eyes, red-rimmed and lost, stared vacantly at the patterned carpet, her hands twisting nervously together. "And this is my daughter, Lucy. As you can imagine, Miss Marple, she's utterly devastated," Margaret added, her voice softening, slightly with maternal concern as she placed a protective arm around Lucy's trembling shoulders. Next, Uncle Henry shuffled forward, his nervous disposition immediately evident. A slight balding man, he fidgeted continually, avoiding direct eye contact. "Henry Saunders, Simon's uncle," he muttered quietly, visibly uneasy in the presence of strangers. His evasiveness struck Miss Marple as particularly notable, though she revealed none of her suspicion, merely nodding politely. Finally, Miss Marple's attention settled on Emily Carter. Tall and graceful, Emily possessed a quiet confidence that set her apart. Her eyes, though grief-stricken, retained clarity and calmness. "Miss Marple," Emily began quietly, stepping forward decisively, "there is something you must see immediately." From her pocket, Emily produced a crumpled telegram, handing it carefully to Miss Marple. "I received this yesterday morning, just before Simon's death was discovered. It appears to be from him, though I still struggle to believe he would write such a thing." Miss Marple unfolded the telegram, reading it slowly and carefully. The message was stark, emotional, almost melodramatic in tone. "Emily, I cannot go on with this charade. I still love you and cannot marry Lucy. My family presses me relentlessly. Forgive me, Simon." The room fell utterly silent as Miss Marple absorbed the words. She glanced briefly at Lucy, whose face was now streaked with fresh tears, and at Aunt Margaret, whose expression had hardened defensively. Emily continued quietly. "Simon and I were once engaged, Miss Marple. We were friends, partners, and, for a time, something more. Eventually, we agreed to end our engagement amicably, for the sake of our business. We remained close, but purely as friends. He seemed genuinely happy moving forward with Lucy." Aunt Margaret quickly interjected, her voice sharp and insistent. "Exactly right. Simon was entirely devoted to Lucy. He had moved beyond any previous relationships. This telegram makes no sense at all." No, Miss Marple observed carefully, noting the quick, uneasy glances exchanged among family members, sensing suppressed emotions and hidden anxieties beneath their carefully constructed facades. Quietly folding the telegram, Miss Marple met Emily's steady gaze. "Thank you, Miss Carter. It's very important that we consider every detail." Inspector Craddock cleared his throat softly, sensing the tension, and gently guided the conversation forward. Miss Marple remained silent, continuing to absorb each nuance, each hesitation, each guarded expression around her. As introductions concluded and conversations faded into uncomfortable silence, Miss Marple knew instinctively that beneath the family's carefully maintained appearances lay secrets waiting to be uncovered, secrets she was determined to reveal. Chapter 3. The Scene of the Tragedy. Miss Marple followed Inspector Craddock silently along the wide, dimly lit hallway that led to Simon Ashcroft's private bedroom. Portraits of the Ashcroft ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to watch the visitors suspiciously, each face holding secrets of its own. Miss Marple paused briefly, observing the portraits, noting the striking resemblance between Simon and his forebears, the same dark eyes and proud bearing. Inspector Craddock paused in front of an imposing oak door at the far end of the corridor. He hesitated momentarily before unlocking and opening it slowly, revealing a spacious room that had remained untouched since the discovery of Simon's body. Miss Marple stepped forward with keen interest, her eyes quickly scanning the layout. The bedroom was neat, orderly, and remarkably undisturbed for a place associated with such tragedy. Heavy velvet curtains partially blocked the afternoon sunlight, casting the room into an unsettling gloom. The bed, large and elaborately carved, was immaculately made, the pristine sheets untouched. A large antique wardrobe stood against the wall opposite the bed, its doors slightly ajar, revealing neatly hung suits and shirts immaculately arranged. Inspector Craddock pointed toward a desk situated near a wide window overlooking the gardens below. "It is precisely as we found it," he explained quietly. Papers and documents were scattered across the polished mahogany surface, yet the chaos seemed ordinary, indicative of typical work rather than distress. A pen lay casually atop an unfinished letter, giving the impression Simon had merely stepped away momentarily rather than permanently. Miss Marple moved slowly and deliberately, her sharp eyes absorbing every detail. Beside the desk was a dinner tray. He had eaten a small amount of food, but no poison was detected in the meal. Miss Marple nodded slowly, her mind already considering the significance of this departure from Simon's routine. She turned, noticing Gladys, the Ashcrofts' devoted servant, hovering uncertainly by the door. She beckoned her forward gently. "Gladys," Miss Marple addressed her kindly, "when you brought Simon's dinner last night, did anything strike you as unusual about his demeanor or mood?" Gladys stepped timidly into the room, casting nervous glances around the familiar yet suddenly forbidding surroundings. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered, "Oh no, Miss Marple. Master Simon was cheerful, polite as ever. He thanked me kindly and even smiled. He seemed in very good spirits. I would never have guessed that—" She paused, her voice catching in distress, "that this could happen." Miss Marple gave the servant a sympathetic nod, encouraging her gently. "Did he say anything particular? Perhaps mention plans or concerns?" Gladys shook her head earnestly. "Nothing of the sort, Miss Marple. He merely thanked me and wished me a good evening, as always. He even mentioned looking forward to his wedding. It was quite ordinary, really." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, intrigued by the servant's account. The inconsistency between Simon's apparently cheerful state and the act attributed to him raised compelling questions. She moved closer to the desk again, carefully examining the scattered papers. Her slender fingers traced along the surface, noting the apparent absence of distress or agitation. "Inspector," she said quietly, drawing his attention to the desk once more. "These documents indicate normal business matters. No signs of any urgency or worry. Hardly what you would expect from a man intending to end his life." Inspector Craddock moved to her side, glancing down at the scattered paperwork, nodding thoughtfully. "You're quite right, Miss Marple. Nothing here suggests a troubled state of mind." Miss Marple stepped back thoughtfully, her eyes scanning the room once more, meticulously taking in every subtle detail. The neat arrangement of Simon's belongings, the untouched food, the casual scattering of work papers, each element hinted toward a conclusion far different from suicide. She addressed Gladys again, her voice gentle yet probing. "One last thing, Gladys. Was Simon's bedroom door locked when you left him after delivering dinner?" "No, Miss Marple," Gladys replied firmly, her brow furrowed in recollection. "He never locked his door, not until later at night, usually just before retiring." Inspector Craddock raised an eyebrow curiously, exchanging a glance with Miss Marple, who murmured thoughtfully, "How peculiar." Miss Marple took a final, lingering look around the silent, tragic room, deeply aware that appearances could deceive. "Indeed, Inspector," she remarked gently, her voice holding quiet conviction, "there are certainly many peculiarities here, far too many to simply dismiss as coincidence." Chapter 4. The Company. He kept, the following morning, Miss Marple arrived at Simon Ashcroft's jewelry business alongside Inspector Craddock. The building, situated in the heart of the village's bustling commercial district, displayed an elegant exterior, its refined gold-lettered signage speaking of both luxury and sophistication. Yet Miss Marple sensed a discordant undertone beneath, its polished facade, a subtle tension that seemed to echo from within. They were ushered through gleaming glass doors into an opulent reception area. Elegant display cases exhibited finely crafted jewelry, glittering under strategically placed lights. Employees moved quietly and efficiently, exchanging hurried whispers that ceased abruptly as Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock entered, their eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and guarded caution. The receptionist greeted them politely, clearly nervous. "Mr. Parsons will be with you momentarily," she informed them softly, avoiding their gaze as she disappeared swiftly into an inner office. Shortly thereafter, Harold Parsons emerged, tall, thin, and impeccably dressed. His dark suit was meticulously tailored, his posture rigid as he approached with brisk, almost militant precision. His eyes, however, revealed an underlying bitterness, a cold edge barely concealed beneath his practiced cordiality. "Inspector," Parsons greeted formally, offering a stiff handshake before turning his cool gaze toward Miss Marple. "And you must be Miss Marple. The family informed me you might visit." "Indeed, Mr. Parsons," Miss Marple responded with a soft smile, her observant eyes carefully studying his every gesture. "We greatly appreciate your cooperation." Parsons led them into his spacious office, minimally decorated and impeccably ordered, reflecting a man who prized control and efficiency above all else. Once seated, Inspector Craddock began the questioning carefully, mindful of Parsons' obvious discomfort. "Could you tell us about Simon's relationships here at the company?" the inspector began. We'd particularly like to understand his interactions with employees and any conflicts or difficulties that might have arisen. Parsons leaned back slightly, his expression turning subtly disdainful. Simon was popular, he admitted reluctantly, choosing his words with deliberate care. He was charismatic, charming even. Unfortunately, his charm was often directed indiscriminately. Simon's impulsiveness and flirtatious behavior frequently caused friction among the staff. "Good morning, Mr. Saunders," Inspector Craddock began firmly, his expression stern but not unkind. "We appreciate your willingness to speak with us again. There are some additional matters we must discuss concerning your nephew." Henry nodded, stiffly, sinking into a chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Yes, Inspector. Of course. Whatever I can do to help," he muttered, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. Miss Marple seated herself gently opposite Henry, her expression gentle but probing. "Mr. Saunders, yesterday it was mentioned briefly that you had borrowed money from Simon's company. Could you please tell us a little more about the nature of these loans?" Henry shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Miss Marple's steady gaze. It was nothing unusual," he stammered uncertainly. "Simon helped me out occasionally. I've had some financial troubles lately. Nothing serious, mind you. Just some poor investments." Simon understood. He was always generous to family. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice remained soft and non-threatening. "And these loans, Mr. Saunders, were they formally documented?" Henry hesitated, visibly struggling, with embarrassment and unease. "Not officially," he admitted reluctantly. "Simon didn't see the need for formalities among family. It was always understood I would repay him as soon as possible." Inspector Craddock leaned forward slightly, interjecting calmly. "Yet, according to our inquiries at the jewelry business, these informal arrangements caused considerable tension between Simon and his business partner, Miss Carter." Henry's face flushed deeply, his embarrassment giving way to defensive indignation. "Look, I know Emily Carter disapproved, but Simon trusted me. He believed family loyalty mattered more than rigid business protocols." Miss Marple observed him thoughtfully, sensing his genuine distress mingled with deeper fear. She gently pressed him further. "Forgive my directness, Mr. Saunders, but we must ask, did your financial situation provide a motive for harming Simon?" Henry's reaction was immediate and emphatic, his voice trembling but determined. "Absolutely not. Simon was my nephew. I would never dream of hurting him. Yes, I owed him money, and yes, my finances are a mess, but murder? It's beyond comprehension. Simon's death has left me devastated." Inspector Craddock watched Henry closely, noting his fervent denial with quiet scrutiny. Yet he seemed inclined for now to accept the sincerity of Henry's emotions. Miss Marple continued to quietly observe him, her instincts telling her there was more beneath the surface, though perhaps not directly implicating Henry in murder. Just as Miss Marple considered her next question, Gladys appeared abruptly at the door, clearly agitated. She wrung her hands nervously, apologizing for her intrusion, yet compelled by urgency. "Miss Marple, Inspector, please forgive me, but I've just remembered something terribly important." Miss Marple immediately turned toward Gladys with keen interest. "Please, Gladys, take a deep breath and tell us what you've recalled." Gladys steadied herself, her words tumbling out quickly. "On the evening of Master Simon's death, a driver from the company came to deliver a file for Simon. It was quite unusual, you see. It was delivered along with his evening meal. In the shock of everything that happened, I completely forgot about it until just now. Miss Marple's attention sharpened immediately, her gentle voice urgent. This file, do you recall what happened to it after you gave it to Simon? Gladys nodded earnestly. I placed it directly onto his desk alongside the meal tray. Simon thanked me politely and seemed to regard it as quite ordinary, although I noticed he seemed a little curious about its sudden arrival. Inspector Craddock exchanged a significant glance with Miss Marple, both sensing the importance of Gladys's revelation. We must locate that file immediately, Miss Marple, said decisively. Gladys, can you recall exactly where it might be now? Gladys shook her head uncertainly, distress evident on her face. It should still be in Simon's room. I don't recall seeing it anywhere else. Miss Marple stood, her demeanor firm yet calm. Inspector, we must retrieve and examine that file without delay. I suspect it holds a key detail, a clue we cannot afford to overlook. Inspector Craddock nodded gravely, quickly arranging for the search. As they moved purposefully toward Simon's bedroom, Miss Marple reflected quietly, confident that they were finally drawing closer to understanding the truth hidden within Ashcroft Hall. Chapter 7. Unseen Dangers. In the quiet solitude of Ashcroft. Hall's study, Miss Marple seated herself at Simon's expansive desk, the mysterious file laid carefully before her. Inspector Craddock stood silently nearby, his attention focused keenly on Miss Marple's every movement. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence punctuated only by the faint ticking of a distant clock and the occasional rustle of pages, as Miss Marple meticulously examined each sheet. As she slowly turned page after page, Miss Marple's experienced eyes detected subtle yet distinct markings. Faint, almost imperceptible stains that bore evidence of corrosion. She adjusted her spectacles, carefully holding one page closer to the desk lamp, illuminating its surface with precise clarity. Her heart quickened as she recognized the telltale signs of acid residue hidden cleverly along the edges. "Inspector?" she murmured softly, her voice steady but carrying a quiet intensity. "These pages have been deliberately coated. These faint marks appear to be sulfuric acid, the very poison that killed Simon." Inspector Craddock leaned forward eagerly, his own eyes narrowing as he examined the page in question. "How extraordinary," he muttered grimly. But how could Simon unknowingly ingest the poison from merely handling these documents? Miss Marple looked thoughtfully up at the inspector, a gentle sadness settling over her features. "Sulfuric acid. Inspector, is extremely corrosive. Even faint residue on Simon's fingers would easily have transferred to his mouth if he handled food soon after. The poison, once ingested, would have caused immediate and devastating internal damage. Simon, tragically, had no idea that he had become the unwitting victim of a meticulously planned murder." Inspector Craddock shook his head in disbelief, clearly disturbed by the chilling revelation. "Someone went to extraordinary lengths, Miss Marple. This is calculated and exceptionally cunning." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed quietly, her eyes drifting back to the tainted pages thoughtfully. "Whoever orchestrated this knew Simon's habits intimately, certain he would handle these documents carefully and eat shortly afterward. It was a cold and deliberate act." Miss Marple's mind moved swiftly, understanding the need for immediate clarity. She turned decisively to Inspector Craddock. "Inspector, we must speak urgently with the driver who delivered this file. He may provide crucial information regarding its origin and the individual who dispatched it." Within the hour, the driver arrived, looking nervous and deeply unsettled. He stood hesitantly before Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock, glancing between them uncertainly as he awaited their questions. "Can you confirm precisely who gave you this file to deliver to Simon Ashcroft?" Inspector Craddock began firmly, holding the document carefully within view. The driver swallowed hard, clearly troubled, but determined to speak the truth. "Yes, sir. It was Mr. Harold Parsons, the manager. He handed it directly to me and instructed me specifically to ensure Simon received it immediately." Miss Marple observed the driver intently, her gentle yet probing manner urging him gently onward. "Did Mr. Parsons give any special instructions or explanations regarding the urgency or the contents of this file?" "No, Miss Marple," the driver replied, shaking his head vigorously. "Mr. Parsons simply said it was urgent business material and Simon was expecting it. He seemed entirely normal, but now thinking back, he did seem very particular about Simon receiving it quickly." Inspector Craddock exchanged a significant glance with Miss Marple, understanding the implication immediately. "Thank you. You have been extremely helpful. You may go now." As the driver departed hastily, Miss Marple spoke softly, her voice tinged with quiet resolve. "Inspector, we must investigate Mr. Parsons' connections further, particularly any links to diamond-cutting facilities or chemical suppliers. Whoever poisoned these pages had access to sulfuric acid." Inspector Craddock nodded grimly. "I'll instruct my officers immediately." Hours passed swiftly as the inspector's inquiries brought swift and chilling confirmation. Harold Parsons' brother was employed at a local diamond-cutting factory, routinely handling sulfuric acid used in cleaning and shaping gemstones. This revelation confirmed Miss Marple's suspicion with absolute clarity. Sitting once more with Inspector Craddock, Miss Marple felt the full weight of the tragic discovery settle upon her. The intricate plot had revealed itself entirely, leaving her both relieved and deeply saddened. "Inspector," she began softly, her eyes reflecting genuine sorrow. "The tragedy here lies not merely in the crime itself, but in its calculated cruelty. Simon trusted those around him implicitly, yet that trust was exploited mercilessly." Inspector Craddock's expression hardened resolutely, his determination clear. "Justice will be served, Miss Marple. I promise you that." Miss Marple nodded solemnly, her eyes drifting thoughtfully to the tainted file on the desk before her, the silent, sinister evidence of unseen dangers that lurked behind the facade of friendship and loyalty. It was a stark reminder that appearances could be profoundly deceptive, and that beneath polite society often lay hidden and deadly secrets. Ashcroft Hall stood bathed in pale sunlight, a deceptively serene backdrop for the tense gathering within its stately drawing room. Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock had called the family together, their presence filling the room with apprehensive silence. Mrs. Ashcroft, still fragile and pale, sat upright, her gaze fixed anxiously upon the inspector. Mr. Ashcroft stood protectively behind his wife, his reserved demeanor betraying little emotion, yet a subtle tension tightened his posture. Aunt Margaret's hands rested protectively on Lucy's shoulders, while Uncle Henry hovered nervously near the doorway, clearly apprehensive. Emily Carter sat quietly by the fireplace, her eyes solemn and wary. Harold Parsons stood slightly apart, his usually impeccable appearance frayed at the edges, his suit wrinkled, his expression strained. Miss Marple regarded him quietly, her calm gaze steady and unwavering. Inspector Craddock began to speak, his voice clear and authoritative. We've gathered here today because new and definitive evidence has emerged regarding Simon Ashcroft's death. This investigation has uncovered a carefully orchestrated murder, disguised as a suicide, a deception, intended to deflect suspicion away from the true culprit. The family reacted with stunned disbelief, gasps and murmurs rippling through the group. Parsons alone remained rigidly still, his eyes fixed warily on Inspector Craddock. Miss Marple gently stepped forward, her manner calm yet resolute, her voice quiet but compelling, drawing everyone's attention instantly. The poison that killed Simon, sulfuric acid, was cunningly concealed on the pages of a file delivered to him on the evening of his death. Simon, entirely unaware, handled the tainted papers and subsequently transferred the poison to his mouth as he ate. Mrs. Ashcroft gasped softly, a hand flying to her mouth in horror. Lucy began to quietly sob, comforted by Aunt Margaret's steady presence. Inspector Craddock continued firmly, his gaze unwavering as it settled upon Parsons. "We have traced the file back to you, Mr. Parsons. The delivery driver confirmed you, personally instructed him to deliver it directly to Simon. Furthermore, we discovered your brother's employment at the diamond cutting factory, where access to sulfuric acid was readily available." Parsons visibly flinched under the inspector's scrutiny, yet he maintained a stubborn silence, jaw clenched tightly. Miss Marple moved closer, her gentle eyes filled with compassionate understanding, yet her tone left no doubt about the seriousness of the accusations. "Mr. Parsons," Miss Marple began softly, "I believe I understand your anger and frustration, feelings powerful enough to overwhelm even the strongest moral compasses. Simon's repeated indiscretions deeply hurt you, didn't they?" Parsons' composure cracked slightly, a flicker of emotion surfacing before being hastily suppressed. Miss Marple continued gently, her tone sympathetic yet unwaveringly firm. "Simon persisted in pursuing your wife despite repeated warnings. You felt trapped, betrayed, and humiliated. Such intense emotions can drive even decent people to desperate acts." Parsons' eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, filled with sudden anguish that confirmed her words. His facade wavered further as he responded bitterly, voice low and strained. He wouldn't stop. Simon thought his charm exempted him from consequences. I warned him repeatedly, yet he persisted, brazenly humiliating me and disregarding the sanctity of my marriage. Miss Marple nodded gently, her expression filled with quiet empathy that seemed to dismantle Parsons' final defenses. "And thus," she said, "you devised a plan, intricate and ruthless, one that would remove Simon permanently while deflecting suspicion onto an imagined love triangle. You sent the telegram in Simon's name to Emily Carter, skillfully misdirecting suspicion and painting Simon's death as a tragic suicide." Parsons' shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the floor as his voice broke with emotion. "Yes, I sent the telegram, knowing it would lead investigators astray. I wanted justice for myself, but now I see it wasn't justice, only bitter revenge." Inspector Craddock moved forward decisively, placing a firm yet compassionate hand on Parsons' shoulder. "Harold Parsons, you are under arrest for the murder of Simon Ashcroft. You will accompany us now." The inspector's firm tone allowed no protest, and Parsons quietly complied, casting one last remorseful glance toward the assembled family before being escorted from the room. As the gravity of the revelation settled over the family, Mrs. Ashcroft rose unsteadily, moving toward Miss Marple with tears in her eyes. "Miss Marple, thank you. Without your persistence and insight, Simon's murderer would never have faced justice. We owe you more than words can express." Miss Marple offered a gentle, modest smile, shaking her head softly. "It was merely a matter of observing human nature, Mrs. Ashcroft. Sadly, human nature remains stubbornly unchanged, predictable only in its unpredictability." With sincere farewells and heartfelt gratitude, Miss Marple took her leave of Ashcroft Hall, returning peacefully to her beloved home in St. Mary Mead. Seated once again by her comforting fireplace, she resumed knitting the cardigan for her niece, her fingers deftly guiding the needles through the soft wool. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, deeply saddened by the tragic loss and the tangled web of bitterness and revenge that had led to such sorrow. Yet beneath the sorrow lingered a quiet satisfaction. Justice had prevailed, truth uncovered, and peace restored, at least for now. Miss Marple knew, however, that human nature would inevitably draw her once more into new mysteries. For people's lives and secrets forever remained intricately intertwined, endlessly fascinating, and perpetually unpredictable. The end. Chapter 8. Justice served, Ashcroft Hall stood bathed in pale sunlight, a deceptively serene backdrop for the tense gathering within its stately drawing room. Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock had called the family together, their presence filling the room with apprehensive silence. Mrs. Ashcroft, still fragile and pale, sat upright, her gaze fixed anxiously upon the inspector. Mr. Ashcroft stood protectively behind his wife, his reserved demeanor betraying little emotion, yet a subtle tension tightened his posture. Aunt Margaret's hands rested protectively on Lucy's shoulders, while Uncle Henry hovered nervously near the doorway, clearly apprehensive. Emily Carter sat quietly by the fireplace, her eyes solemn and wary. Harold Parsons stood slightly apart, his usually impeccable appearance frayed at the edges, his suit wrinkled, his expression strained. Miss Marple regarded him quietly, her calm gaze steady and unwavering. Inspector Craddock began to speak, his voice clear and authoritative. "We've gathered here today because new and definitive evidence has emerged regarding Simon Ashcroft's death. This investigation has uncovered a carefully orchestrated murder, disguised as a suicide, a deception, intended to deflect suspicion away from the true culprit." The family reacted with stunned disbelief, gasps and murmurs rippling through the group. Parsons alone remained rigidly still, his eyes fixed warily on Inspector Craddock. Miss Marple gently stepped forward, her manner calm yet resolute, her voice quiet but compelling, drawing everyone's attention instantly. "The poison that killed Simon, sulfuric acid, was cunningly concealed on the pages of a file delivered to him on the evening of his death. Simon, entirely unaware, handled the tainted papers and subsequently transferred the poison to his mouth. As he ate," Mrs. Ashcroft gasped softly, a hand flying to her mouth in horror. Lucy began to quietly sob, comforted by Aunt Margaret's steady presence. Inspector Craddock continued firmly, his gaze unwavering as it settled upon Parsons. "We have traced the file back to you, Mr. Parsons. The delivery driver confirmed you, personally instructed him to deliver it directly to Simon. Furthermore, we discovered your brother's employment at the diamond cutting factory, where access to sulfuric acid was readily available." Parsons visibly flinched under the inspector's scrutiny, yet he maintained a stubborn silence, jaw clenched tightly. Miss Marple moved closer, her gentle eyes filled with compassionate understanding, yet her tone left no doubt about the seriousness of the accusations. "Mr. Parsons," Miss Marple began softly, "I believe I understand your anger and frustration, feelings powerful enough to overwhelm even the strongest moral compasses. Simon's repeated indiscretions deeply hurt you, didn't they? Parsons. Composure cracked slightly, a flicker of emotion surfacing before being hastily suppressed. Miss Marple continued gently, her tone sympathetic yet unwaveringly firm. Simon persisted in pursuing your wife despite repeated warnings. You felt trapped, betrayed, and humiliated. Such intense emotions can drive even decent people to desperate acts. Parsons' eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, filled with sudden anguish that confirmed her words. His facade wavered further as he responded bitterly, voice low and strained. He wouldn't stop. Simon thought his charm exempted him from consequences. I warned him repeatedly, yet he persisted, brazenly humiliating me and disregarding the sanctity of my marriage. Miss Marple nodded gently, her expression filled with quiet empathy that seemed to dismantle Parsons' final defenses. And thus, she said, you devised a plan, intricate and ruthless, one that would remove Simon permanently while deflecting suspicion onto an imagined love triangle. You sent the telegram in Simon's name to Emily Carter, skillfully misdirecting suspicion and painting Simon's death as a tragic suicide. Parsons' shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the floor as his voice broke with emotion. Yes, I sent the telegram, knowing it would lead investigators astray. I wanted justice for myself, but now I see it wasn't justice, only bitter revenge. Inspector Craddock moved forward decisively, placing a firm yet compassionate hand on Parsons' shoulder. Harold Parsons, you are under arrest for the murder of Simon Ashcroft. You will accompany us now. The inspector's firm tone allowed no protest, and Parsons quietly complied, casting one last remorseful glance toward the assembled family before being escorted from the room. As the gravity of the revelation settled over the family, Mrs. Ashcroft rose unsteadily, moving toward Miss Marple with tears in her eyes. Miss Marple, thank you. Without your persistence and insight, Simon's murderer would never have faced justice. We owe you more than words can express. Miss Marple offered a gentle, modest smile, shaking her head softly. It was merely a matter of observing human nature, Mrs. Ashcroft. Sadly, human nature remains stubbornly unchanged, predictable only in its unpredictability. With sincere farewells and heartfelt gratitude, Miss Marple took her leave of Ashcroft Hall, returning peacefully to her beloved home in St. Mary Mead. Seated once again by her comforting fireplace, she resumed knitting the cardigan for her niece, her fingers deftly guiding the needles through the soft wool. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, deeply saddened by the tragic loss and the tangled web of bitterness and revenge that had led to such sorrow. Yet beneath the sorrow lingered a quiet satisfaction. Justice had prevailed, truth uncovered, and peace restored, at least for now. Miss Marple knew, however, that human nature would inevitably draw her once more into new mysteries, for people's lives and secrets forever remained intricately intertwined, endlessly fascinating, and perpetually unpredictable. The end.